This story is titled, My Sister Refused to Help Me When I Desperately Needed Help. Now she's demanding I pay for her kids' medical bills. Hey everyone, before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. Hi everyone, throwaway because my sister and family are the kind of people who'd 100% stalk my posts to prove a point. So, here's the deal. My sister, 28 married female, and I, 26 single female, aren't close, and we've never really been. Growing up, we were total opposites. She was the overachiever, super active, sports captain, every teacher's favorite. Me? Let's just say I was the one getting talks from our parents about applying myself. Even as adults, we just don't vibe. She's all about order and discipline, while I've been stumbling through life, figuring things out as I go. Anyway, rewind to 1 year ago, and my life was a complete mess. I had just lost my job. It wasn't even like I was slacking off or anything. The company just shut down out of nowhere. No warning, no severance, nothing. One day, I'm sitting at my desk, planning next month's rent, and the next, my manager's like, "Hey, sorry to do this, but we're closing. You'll get your final check in 2 weeks." I couldn't believe it. I had no backup plan, no savings, just bills piling up and rent staring me in the face. It felt like the walls were closing in. For days, I barely slept. My brain was running a marathon of panic. I tried looking for temp jobs, called up old coworkers, and even considered selling my laptop, which was basically my lifeline to finding work. But nothing was coming together. And with rent due in less than 2 weeks, I was running out of options fast. That's when I realized I'd have to do the one thing I really didn't want to do. Ask my sister for help. Now, let me explain something about my sister. She's not mean exactly, but she's rigid. Everything in her life is black and white, right and wrong, her way or no way. And she's always been like that. Growing up, if I didn't do things her way, whether it was cleaning our shared room or choosing classes in high school, she'd flip out. So asking her for help wasn't just hard for me, it felt humiliating. But I didn't have a choice. I couldn't turn to my parents for help either. My dad's on disability, and my mom's still struggling to pay off their mortgage. If I asked them, they'd probably dip into their retirement savings to help me, and that's the last thing I wanted. It's also probably why they've been putting pressure on me to figure things out on my own, instead of stepping in directly. So here I am with only one solution left. Begging my sister, I wish I didn't. I remember sitting on my couch, staring at my phone for what felt like hours. My pride was screaming at me not to call her. But my fear of losing my apartment won out. So I called. When she answered, she sounded annoyed, like I was interrupting her day. I tried to keep it together, but as soon as I started explaining my situation, I broke down, full-on ugly crying. I told her everything, that I'd lost my job, that I was scared, and that I just needed $1,000 to cover rent until I could figure things out. Her response? No, just like that. Flat, cold, no hesitation. Then she launched into this lecture about how she doesn't believe in lending money to family because it always goes wrong and ruins relationships. She said it wasn't personal, just her policy, like she was some kind of bank manager turning down a loan application. I couldn't believe it. I tried to reason with her, to explain that I wasn't asking for a handout, just a loan. But she cut me off with, "I'm sorry, but I can't help you." And then she hung up. I sat there in shock, the phone still in my hand. I mean, I knew we weren't close, but this was a whole new level of cold. She didn't even offer to help in another way. No, let me talk to my husband. No, maybe I can buy you groceries or help you job hunt. Just nothing. It felt like she was slamming the door in my face, and I was left standing out in the rain. That night, I couldn't stop crying. The issue for me wasn't money anymore. Not that she didn't lend the money. It's that she didn't give a single fuck. She, Hungarian upper, on, her, sobbing, sister. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, wondering if I'd said something wrong, if I'd somehow offended her. But the truth was, she just didn't care. And that realization hit me harder than losing my job. She was my sister, my blood, and in my moment of need, she turned her back on me. And I didn't expect she would be that cold. I was a complete mess after that. The weight of her no wasn't just about the money. It was like being smacked in the face with the reality of our relationship, or lack of one. I mean, who does that? I wasn't some distant cousin she barely knew. I was her sister, and I wasn't asking for a shopping spree. I was asking for a lifeline. But there was no time to sit around feeling sorry for myself. Rent wasn't going to pay itself, and I couldn't afford to lose my apartment. The next morning, I woke up with puffy eyes from crying and a pounding headache, but I told myself, if she's not going to help, then screw it. I'll figure this out on my own. The first thing I did was make a list of everything I could sell. It was pathetic how little I had that was worth anything. I sold my old gaming console, the decent pair of headphones, and anything extra I sold online within a day. I even thought about pawning my laptop, but it was my only tool to search for jobs. Every sale felt like giving up a little piece of my dignity, but what choice did I have? It wasn't just the selling part that stung, it was the reminder of how precarious my situation was. While I was packing up my old console to ship it off, I kept thinking about all the little luxuries my sister took for granted. Her perfectly decorated house, her weekly Pilates classes, her husband's brand new car. She had everything, and I was over here counting pennies just to keep a roof over my head. It wasn't fair, but life isn't fair. That was a lesson I'd learned the hard way. I also decided to swallow my pride, again, and reached out to a couple of friends. That was even harder than calling my sister because, let's be real, borrowing money from friends is its own kind of awkward. But you know what? They came through. Not with big amounts, but enough to keep the landlord off my back for another couple of weeks. One friend even offered to let me crash on their couch if it came to that. That gesture alone brought me to tears. Still, I didn't want to be a burden to anyone, so I started applying for every job I could find. Temp work, retail, even stuff way out of my field. I didn't care about titles or salaries anymore. I just needed something to keep me afloat. For weeks, my days were a cycle of sending out resumes, checking job boards, and attending interviews where I'd get the same canned rejection. It was soul-crushing, but I kept going. Meanwhile, my sister didn't check in, not once. No, how are you holding up? Or, did you figure something out? It was radio silence. And honestly, that hurt even more. It's not like I expected her to change her mind, but a text to see if I was okay wouldn't have killed her. One moment that really sticks out from that time was when I bumped into a neighbor while taking out the trash. She was this sweet older lady who lived 2 doors down, and she could tell something was off. I guess I must have looked as stressed as I felt, because she stopped me and said, "You've got a lot on your shoulders, don't you?" Before I knew it, I was spilling my guts to her, tears and all. She didn't offer me money or anything like that, but she listened. For the first time, I felt like someone actually cared. I managed to scrape by that month, but barely. I kept selling stuff and picking up odd gigs, walking dogs, assembling furniture, anything I could find. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept me in my apartment, and that was all that mattered. Looking back, those weeks were some of the hardest of my life, but they also taught me something important. When push comes to shove, I can survive on my own. The thing is, though, that survival came at a cost. My trust in my sister has gone, completely gone. Before this, I'd always held on to this naive hope that, despite our differences, we'd always be there for each other in the big moments. But that phone call shattered that illusion. It wasn't just about money, it was about what it represented. Her refusal wasn't just a no to helping me pay rent, it was a no to standing by me when I needed her most. For weeks, I kept replaying that conversation in my head, trying to make sense of it. I wondered if maybe I'd caught her on a bad day, or if she had her own struggles I didn't know about. But then I'd remember how cold she sounded, how quick she was to shut me down, and I'd get angry all over again. It was like a cycle of hurt and frustration that I couldn't escape. The silence from her side didn't help either. I mean, even if she wasn't going to lend me the money, she could have at least checked in. A simple, "Hey, how's everything going?" would have meant the world to me. But no, she was too busy with her perfect little life to spare a thought for her struggling sister. And the more I thought about it, the more resentful I became. I didn't tell anyone else in the family about what happened. Part of me didn't want to deal with the drama, but another part of me felt embarrassed. Like, what would they even say? That I should have planned better? That I should have expected this from her? It felt easier to keep it to myself and focus on moving forward. And I did move forward, eventually. 2 years later, life looked a lot different for me. After months of grinding at that temp job, I finally landed a stable position with a decent salary. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, gave me room to breathe, and most importantly, helped me rebuild my life. I didn't hear much from my sister during that time, and honestly, I preferred it that way. It wasn't like we ever had weekly catch-ups before, and after what happened, the idea of talking to her felt like reopening a wound that hadn't fully healed. I knew I should have been over it by then, but the resentment lingered. I mean, how do you forget something like that? Sure, I was doing better now, but that didn't erase the fact that when I'd needed her the most, she'd slammed the door in my face. So imagine my surprise when my phone buzzed one evening, and there it was, her name lighting up my screen. For a second, I thought it must have been a mistake. She never called me. Ever. My first instinct was to ignore it, but I wanted to know why she's calling. And the moment I said hello, I knew something was wrong. She was crying. Not the delicate, sniffly kind of crying you hear in movies. This was full-on sobbing. It took her a minute to calm down enough to even get the words out, and when she did, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Her husband had been laid off a few months ago, and they were struggling. On top of that, her 3-year-old daughter, my niece, needed a medical treatment that insurance wouldn't cover up front. They needed $1,500, and she was asking me for help. I sat there in stunned silence, trying to process what she'd just said. This was the same sister who had turned me away when I needed $1,000 to avoid losing my apartment. The same sister who had lectured me about not lending money to family. And now she was asking me to bail her out? She must have sensed my hesitation, because she quickly launched into a speech about how dire the situation was. "It's for my daughter," she said, her voice breaking. "She's just a baby, and we don't have anyone else to turn to." She begged me, practically pleading through the phone. "Please, I'll pay you back as soon as we get reimbursed. I swear." And here's the thing. I love my niece. She's adorable, sweet, and completely innocent in all of this. But as much as I cared about her, I couldn't ignore the irony of the situation. 2 years ago, I'd been the one on the other end of that call, desperate and scared, and my sister had shut me down without a second thought. Now, here she was, expecting me to swoop in and save the day. I took a deep breath and said, "I'm sorry, but I can't help you." Only silence on the other end. I could almost hear her taking a deep breath, gearing up for what I knew was coming. And then, like a switch had been flipped, she exploded. "How could you do this?" she screamed. "This isn't about me. This is about my daughter, your niece. How can you punish an innocent child just to get back at me? What kind of person does that?" I held the phone away for a second, stunned. "You're petty, vindictive, selfish. That's what you are. Selfish." "Calm down," I said. "You're not being fair right now. I'm not punishing anyone, least of all my niece. But I'm not going to hand over money when you haven't even been honest with me." "Honest with you?" she snapped. "What the hell does that even mean? You think I'm lying about my daughter's health now? God, you've really sunk low, haven't you?" "I didn't say that," I replied. "But you weren't upfront about where the money would actually go. You told me it was all for medical bills, but I found out a big chunk of it is for other expenses. That's not okay, and you know it." She didn't even acknowledge what I'd said. Instead, she doubled down. "You have no idea what it's like to be in my position. My husband's out of work, we're drowning in bills, and I'm doing everything I can to keep this family afloat. But you're just sitting there on your high horse, judging me like you're so much better." I told her, "This isn't about me being better or worse. This is about boundaries. 2 years ago, I was in a terrible spot. I came to you for help, and you said no. Fine, that was your choice. But now, you're in a similar situation, and you expect me to just forget all of that and bail you out? Do you see how unfair that is? Don't you dare compare this to what happened 2 years ago," she shouted. "You needed money for rent. That's not the same as needing money for my child's health. You're a grown adult. You could have figured it out on your own." "And I did," I shot back. "I figured it out on my own because I had no other choice. And guess what? You do have other choices. Sell some stuff, borrow smaller amounts from other people, figure out a payment plan. But don't stand here and act like I'm the bad guy for not swooping in to fix everything." "Oh, so now you're going to lecture me?" she said. "That's rich coming from someone who's always been a screw-up. You're just jealous that I've done better for myself, and now you're using this as some sick way to get back at me." "Jealous of you?" I repeated, laughing bitterly. "You think this is about jealousy? No, babe. This is about you showing your true colors. You set the rules for our relationship when you refused to help me. I'm just playing by those same rules now. If you don't like it, maybe you should have thought about that before." She came back with one last jab. "You're heartless. Completely heartless. I hope you can live with yourself knowing you're letting your niece suffer because of your stupid grudge." She scoffed loudly, and then there was a loud click as she hung up. I sat there for a moment, trying to process everything that had just happened. Part of me wanted to cry, but another part of me felt an odd sense of relief. For the first time, I'd stood my ground against her, and even though it was messy and painful, I knew it was the right thing to do. But here's the thing. I wasn't being petty. I wasn't even trying to get revenge. I was just holding her to the same standard she'd set for our relationship. She was the one who'd made it clear that we weren't the kind of family that helped each other out. She'd set the rules, and now she was mad that I was following them. That conversation blew up everything. Within hours, my mom was calling me, demanding to know what had happened. Apparently, my sister had gone straight to our parents, painting me as some heartless monster who was letting my niece suffer out of spite. My mom begged me to reconsider, saying, "It's not about your sister. It's about your niece." Even my dad, who usually stayed out of our drama, called me to say he was disappointed in me. It was overwhelming, to say the least. I felt like I was being ganged up on, like no one even cared to hear my side of the story. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that standing my ground was the right thing to do. If I gave in now, what kind of message would that send? That she could treat me however she wanted, and I'd still come running whenever she needed me? No, thank you. Still, it wasn't an easy decision. I kept thinking about my niece and how none of this was her fault. Part of me wanted to help, but every time I considered it, I'd hear my sister's words from 2 years ago echoing in my head. "I'm sorry, but I can't help you." Over the next few days, the tension in the family only got worse. My parents kept calling, trying to guilt trip me into changing my mind. My sister sent me a flurry of angry texts, accusing me of being cruel and ungrateful. At one point, she even tried to loop in some extended family members to gang up on me, but thankfully, they stayed out of it. Meanwhile, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story than she was letting on. Something about the whole situation didn't sit right with me, so I decided to do a little digging. I reached out to a mutual friend who was closer to my sister, just to ask if they knew what was going on. And that's when I found out the truth. Turns out, my niece's medical situation wasn't as dire as my sister had made it seem. The treatment was more nice to have than life or death. And the $1,500? It wasn't just for the medical bill. She was planning to use some of it to catch up on overdue bills and other expenses. When I asked if my sister had mentioned anything serious, like medical issues or something urgent involving my niece, the friend seemed genuinely confused. They said my sister hadn't mentioned anything about a medical problem. Instead, the last they'd heard from her was her usual complaints about money being tight and the stress of her husband's unemployment. There was no indication of anything urgent or life-threatening, which only confirmed my suspicions that the story wasn't adding up. When I heard that, any lingering guilt I felt disappeared. It wasn't just that she'd asked me for help. It was that she'd lied to manipulate me into saying yes. She'd used her own child as a pawn to tug at my heartstrings, and that was something I couldn't forgive. So yeah, the tables had turned. But I wasn't about to play the game by her rule. If she wanted to fix her problems, she'd have to do it without me. But the family wasn't letting this go. Of course there were my parents. My mom called me at least 3 times a day, each time with a slightly different angle to try to guilt trip me. She ranted about how turning my back on family. Another was focused entirely on my niece. "You might not care about your sister," she said, "but what about that sweet little girl? What has she ever done to you?" My dad, who normally avoided these situations, called once to tell me that I was being cold and selfish. It was hard to hear, even though I knew they didn't have the full story. I tried explaining my side. I told my mom exactly what my sister had said to me 2 years ago, when I'd needed her help. I reminded her how I'd scraped by on my own, without turning to the family for more than emotional support. But my mom wasn't having it. "That was different," she said. "You didn't have a child to think about." It didn't seem to matter to her that I'd been just as desperate, just as scared. To her, the only thing that mattered now was that my niece needed help, and I wasn't giving it. Then, of course, there were the texts from my sister. She was blowing up my phone with paragraph after paragraph of accusations and insults. One message would be her begging me to reconsider. The next would be her calling me names. The whiplash was real. My favorite text, if you can even call it that, was a 6-part rant about how I was lucky to be in a position to help and how I didn't understand what it was like to struggle. That one nearly made me throw my phone across the room. I really wanted to reply, "Oh, I don't know what it's like to struggle. Did you forget about 2 years ago when I was crying to you about losing my apartment?" But I didn't. I knew it wouldn't get through to her. And honestly, I didn't want to waste the energy. At one point, she tried to drag some of our extended family into the mess. I woke up one morning to find a flurry of texts from cousins, aunts, and even a couple of family friends, all saying some variation of, "How could you let your niece suffer?" Most of them didn't even know the full story. They just heard her version, which I'm sure made me sound like the villain of the century. I ended up putting half of them on mute just to get a break from the constant notifications. What really pushed me over the edge, though, was when my sister decided to involve our parents even more directly. She showed up at their house one afternoon with my niece in tow, using her as some kind of prop in this twisted guilt campaign. My mom called me later that day. "Your niece was here today," she said, as if I didn't already know where this conversation was going. "She doesn't understand why her auntie won't help her mommy." I wanted to scream. It wasn't my niece's fault. I knew that. But the fact that my sister was willing to use her own child as a weapon in this fight made my blood boil. It was manipulative, plain and simple, and it only made me more determined to stand my ground. Still, the guilt wasn't easy to shake. Every time I thought about my niece, I felt this ache in my chest. She was just a kid, completely innocent in all of this. She didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of our family drama. Eventually, I decided I needed to take control of the narrative. I couldn't keep letting my sister twist the story to make me look like the bad guy. So I decided to throw some facts on the family group chat. We have this big family group chat, where we act nice and throw fake compliments on each other. You know the type. Here's what I wrote. Hi everyone. I want to clear the air about what's been going on because I think there's been some misunderstanding. 2 years ago, I was in a tough spot and reached out to my sister for help. I was on the verge of losing my apartment and asked to borrow $1,000. She said no, which was her choice, and I respected that, even though it hurt. Well now, and my sister asked me for $1,500. At first, I thought it was for my niece's medical bills, but I found out later that wasn't the whole truth. A large portion of the money was for other expenses. I'm not sharing this to shame anyone. I just want to explain why I made the decision I did. I don't believe in being manipulated, and I don't think it's fair to twist the story to make me look like the villain. I love my niece and would never want her to suffer. But this situation isn't as black and white as it's been made out to be. I'm happy to help directly with my niece's medical bills if that's truly needed, but I won't hand over cash without transparency. I hope you can all understand where I'm coming from. I sent it and immediately muted the chat. I couldn't handle the anxiety of waiting for replies, so I went for a walk to clear my head. By the time I got back, there were over 50 messages. Most were from my sister, who had clearly lost it. I didn't want to address her lying to everyone outright, but I needed to show my parents the truth. I knew they wouldn't believe me if I just accused her of lying. They'd need proof. So, the next day, I decided to call the hospital to ask about the payment options for the treatment my sister claimed was urgent. They were polite but firm, explaining that there was no record of any patient with my niece's name registered for treatment. So I gathered everything to forward to my parents. It was the only way to make them see that my sister had fabricated the entire situation. My mom sounded relieved, but my dad was livid. Why didn't she tell us any of this? He asked. I didn't have an answer. My sister's actions didn't make sense to me either. Was it pride? Desperation? Or was she just so used to manipulating people that she didn't know how to be honest anymore? After weeks of drama, lies, and family turmoil, I was done. Done with the constant back and forth, done with being guilt-tripped, and done with letting my sister's manipulations control my life. It was time to take charge and set boundaries. Not just with her, but with my entire family. So I reached out to my parents again. I knew they were stuck in the middle, trying to mediate and keep the peace, but their constant pressure to fix things was draining me. I called them separately to make my stance clear. When I spoke to my mom, I told her, I love you, but this situation with my sister is toxic. I've explained my side, and I've done more than enough to offer help directly for my niece. But now that we know she lied about the medical bills, I can't get involved anymore. I need you to respect my decision and stop pushing me to change my mind. She sighed heavily, and for a moment, I thought she might argue, but she surprised me. I understand, honey, she said quietly. I just hate seeing the family like this. I do too, I admitted. But this isn't on me. My sister created this situation when she lied to everyone. She needs to own up to her actions. I can't fix this for her, and I won't be dragged into it anymore. My dad was a little harder to convince. Family is family, he said. You don't turn your back on them no matter what. Dad, I didn't turn my back on her, I replied. She turned her back on all of us when she lied and manipulated the situation to make herself look like a victim. You saw the proof from the hospital. There was no treatment scheduled for my niece. She made it all up, and now she's trying to guilt me into cleaning up her mess. That's not what family is supposed to do. He didn't say much after that, but I could tell he was mulling it over. I knew he wouldn't fully agree with me, but at least I'd said my piece. I also made the decision to block my sister's number. It felt extreme, but every interaction with her had been toxic, and I needed space to heal. Before blocking her, I sent her one last message. I love my niece, and I'll always be here for her if she truly needs me. But I can't continue this back and forth with you. It's unhealthy for both of us. I hope one day we can rebuild our relationship, but for now, I need space. Please respect that. She didn't reply before I blocked her, and honestly, I didn't expect her to. I knew this wouldn't be the end of her attempts to stir up drama, but at least I'd taken a step toward protecting my peace. With those boundaries in place, I finally felt like I could breathe again. For the first time in weeks, I had a moment to reflect on everything that had happened. The anger, the hurt, the constant questioning of whether I'd done the right thing. It had all taken a toll on me. Still, I couldn't shake the guilt about my niece. She was the one person in this whole mess who truly didn't deserve any of it. I decided to send her a small care package. Nothing too extravagant, just a few toys and books I knew she'd love. I included a handwritten note that said, I love you so much, and I'm always here for you. I hope you enjoy these gifts. Love, Auntie. I sent it through my parents to avoid any direct contact with my sister, and they promised to pass it along. As the weeks turned into months, I heard less and less about my sister. My parents stopped bringing her up as much, and the group chat quieted down. I didn't know if she'd moved on or was just plotting her next move, but either way, I didn't care. I was done letting her take up space in my head. One unexpected silver lining was the support I got from some of my cousins. After my message in the group chat, a few of them reached out privately to say they admired how I'd handled everything. One cousin even said, "I've always felt like you're acted entitled, but no one ever called her out. Good for you for standing your ground." Hearing that meant more than I can say. It reminded me that I wasn't alone, even if it sometimes felt that way. Eventually, I reached a point where I could think about my sister without feeling a knot of anger in my stomach. I still didn't trust her, and I doubted I ever would, but I didn't feel consumed by the situation anymore. I'd found peace, not because the situation was resolved, but because I'd made the choice to prioritize my own well-being. As for my sister, who knows what the future holds? Maybe one day we'll find a way to rebuild our relationship, but for now, I'm okay with keeping my distance. Life is too short to spend it tangled up in someone else's toxicity, and if there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that peace is priceless, and I'm not willing to sacrifice it for anyone, not even family. Thanks for reading, you guys. I'm excited to hear your opinions on this in the comments.
When my father suddenly passed away from an unexpected illness, it left our family in a difficult situation. Along with the grief of losing him, we discovered he had accumulated a $5 million debt. My mother and my brother, Jack, quickly decided how to deal with my father's inheritance, but they didn't bother to consult me about it. They made all the decisions on their own, leaving me with the heavy burden of the debt. This made me very frustrated and angry. However, part of me couldn't help but smirk inside, thinking about the struggles they might face in the future because of their selfish choices. I'm 25 years old, single, and work as a nursery teacher at a daycare. After graduating from a junior college, I've always lived at home with my family, my father, mother, and Jack, who is close to my age. Growing up, Jack and I never got along very well. He went to a prestigious university, and he always looked down on me for attending a junior college. His arrogance was clear, and he often made fun of me for being what he considered average. He would say hurtful things like, "With your plain looks and lack of impressive qualifications, who would want to date you?" The truth is, I do have a boyfriend, but I've kept it a secret to avoid Jack's constant sarcasm and judgment. There was a time when his insults would sting, but that time has passed. Now, I feel proud of my work as a nursery teacher. I love working with children, helping them learn and grow every day. I find great joy in my job, and Jack's words no longer bother me the way they used to. My mother, on the other hand, seems to adore Jack. She is always praising him to relatives and neighbors because of his prestigious education. I often felt like an afterthought in her eyes, while Jack received all her attention and care. This favoritism was hard to deal with, but my father was different. He was always on my side. Whenever my mother would give Jack special treatment, like snacks, my father would secretly give me the same treats to make sure I didn't feel left out. He supported my decision to become a nursery teacher and would tell me how proud he was of me. His support meant the world to me. My father was the CEO of a small company where Jack also worked. Unfortunately, the company had been facing financial trouble for some time. Despite my father working late into the night to try and fix things, Jack didn't seem to care about the company's struggles. He showed little interest in helping, which made the situation even more difficult. With my father gone, the burden of both the company and the debt is heavy on me. I don't know what the future holds, but I am determined to keep moving forward and stay strong. Though my relationship with my mother and Jack is strained, I know I have the strength to handle whatever comes next, just as my father always believed I could. Jack decided to quit the company, saying, "I can't work for a company run by someone who looks so poor." He found another job, leaving behind the family business. My mother, who had stopped working since she got married, fully dedicated herself to managing the household. However, she had no experience running a business or helping with my father's company. Despite seeing his struggles every day, she didn't seem to understand or appreciate the challenges he faced. Instead, she often criticized him for the company's poor performance. One day, she said, "The company is still struggling. If you don't fix the debt soon, I won't be able to buy that new bag I saw in the magazine. What are you doing all day? You're completely useless. Her attitude was frustrating, especially since she had a habit of spending a lot of money on luxury items without thinking about the impact. She never seemed to value my father's hard work, and this made me feel angry and upset. Even though I'm not an expert in business, I had watched my father work tirelessly from a young age, and I understood how difficult it was to run a company. I couldn't understand why my mother, who had been with him for so many years, couldn't see that. She acted as if my father was incompetent, blaming him for the company's problems when she didn't even try to understand the pressure he was under. One day, I couldn't hold back anymore. I confronted my mother, telling her she needed to stop treating my father with such disrespect. Instead of listening to me, she looked down on me and said, "Why should I be lectured by someone like you? People without an education shouldn't speak on things they don't understand. Keep your opinions to yourself." Her words were hurtful, and Jack, who had always sided with her, joined in and criticized me as well. It became clear to me that, despite being part of the same family, we were very different in our values and personalities. My mother and Jack were focused on appearances and material things, while I had a deeper respect for my father's hard work and dedication. During this tough time, my father's support was what kept me going. He saw my efforts and knew that I took pride in my job as a nursery teacher. "Cheryl, don't let their words get to you. Education doesn't define your worth. What matters is the good work you're doing as a teacher," he told me. His words filled me with warmth and gave me the strength to keep going. Even though I often felt overshadowed by Jack, my father's encouragement made me feel brave. As long as he was by my side, I believed I could handle anything. However, life took a turn I wasn't prepared for. An unexpected event shattered my world. My father passed away. I was horrified when I got the call saying my father had collapsed at work. The company staff told me he was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Without thinking twice, I rushed to the hospital. When I got there, I was shocked to see that neither my mother nor my brother Jack had arrived. Worried and confused, I called my mother, only to hear her say, "I'm too busy to leave. You'll have to take care of your father." I was stunned. How could she say she was too busy when my father's life was in danger? I couldn't understand what could possibly be more important than being at the hospital for him. As a housewife, surely she had more flexibility in her schedule than I did. In disbelief, I took care of the paperwork and formalities at the hospital while waiting to hear from the doctors. The news from the doctor was heartbreaking. My father had suffered from acute heart failure, and they said he only had a few days left. I visited him as much as I could, hoping and praying to see him smile again. A few days after his collapse, he briefly regained consciousness while I was holding his hand. I was so relieved and asked, "Dad, do you recognize me? Can you hear my voice?" But he looked at me with a distant, empty gaze before closing his eyes once more, this time for good. My father passed away, and neither my mother nor Jack made any effort to visit him in the hospital. They didn't come until right before the funeral, showing no interest in making any of the arrangements. As we talked during the funeral planning, it became clear that my father's company had gone bankrupt, leaving behind a $5 million debt. My mother, with a tone full of disgust, said, "Well, inheritances come with debts." As the funeral went on, both my mother and Jack began blaming my father for everything. "He was unreliable in life, and now he's left us with this mess," they complained. "What are we supposed to do about all this debt?" my mother wondered out loud. Then, with a smirk, Jack looked at me and said, "I have an idea. Since Dad was always so fond of you, why don't you inherit everything, including the debt? It's only fair that you repay the love he gave you." My mother quickly added, "Yes, that makes sense. You should take on the debt, too." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Even after my father's death, my mother and Jack were more focused on their own selfish interests than mourning his loss. They were trying to dump the entire inheritance and the massive debt onto me, showing no care or responsibility. All my life, they had looked down on both my father and me, treating us as if we were only useful when it came to their needs. Even in this moment, their greed overshadowed everything else, leaving me feeling completely betrayed. I had a plan in mind, something my father had asked me to use if anything ever happened to him. Now was the time to put it into action. I decided to keep my true intentions to myself and, on the surface, agreed to my mother and Jack's demands. I pretended to go along with their plan while quietly preparing to execute my own. I said to them, "I understand. I'll take on the entire estate, including the debt." My willingness to accept such a massive burden surprised both my mother and Jack. They expected me to resist more, considering I was agreeing to handle a $5 million debt. But they were so happy to pass the responsibility to me that they didn't question my decision much. They looked at me with a mix of triumph and pity, as if they thought they had outsmarted me. Jack smirked and said, "So, you're really going to pay off all the debt? That's lucky for us. I don't understand why you do it, but you're quite naive. I guess that's what happens when you have such little education." My mother and Jack were eager to walk away, feeling they had gotten the better deal. They gave up their claims to my father's estate, and since there were no other relatives to contest the inheritance, I became the sole beneficiary. After my father's death, I moved out of the family home. I didn't want to live there anymore, surrounded by memories and the tension with my mother and Jack. I began a new chapter in my life, and it was then that I quietly set my father's plan into motion. Several months later, I had an unexpected visitor, Jack. I hadn't seen him in a while, but there he was, his face red with anger, looking like he was about to explode. His rage was sparked by the sight of me coming out of a beautiful, extravagant mansion. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice trembling with fury. "How is Cheryl, who supposedly inherited $5 million in debt and has no social status, living in a place like this?" It was clear that both he and my mother had been wondering the same thing. They never expected to see me living in luxury after taking on such a huge debt. I smiled calmly and said, "Seeing your shocked faces is quite the reunion. I'm glad you're doing well." Jack wasn't amused. "Who do you think you are, making jokes? With no education. How did you end up living here?" "I want to know what's going on," he snapped. "This is where I live," I replied. "Is it really so surprising to see me at my own home?" Jack, growing more frustrated, moved toward me in anger. But he didn't realize that working as a nursery teacher had made me stronger than he thought. Lifting children every day had built up my strength, while Jack, who led a mostly lazy lifestyle, wasn't nearly as strong. I stood my ground, and for the first time, Jack realized that things were not as they seemed. Now it was my turn to surprise him. I quickly overpowered Jack and had him on the ground in no time. He looked completely confused as he lay there, and my mother rushed over to help him. I smiled and calmly began to explain everything. "The reason I'm living here is because of the choice both of you made to give up Dad's inheritance," I started. "Before he passed away, Dad had been quietly building wealth through real estate to secure our future. Even though his company had debt, the value of his properties went up a lot over time. After I inherited the estate, I sold the properties at the perfect time. Even after paying inheritance taxes, the profit from the sales was over $11 million. Jack and my mother were shocked, but I continued. Dad knew the value of the properties would rise, which is why I was willing to take on the inheritance, despite the $5 million debt. I paused for a moment to let that sink in before adding, instead of immediately using the money to pay off the debt, I made sure the employees of Dad's company were paid fairly. On top of that, I received a life insurance payout of $5 million. The shock on their faces deepened, and my mother interrupted, "Wait a minute, isn't life insurance usually paid out to the spouse?" "Normally, yes," I replied, but Dad changed the beneficiary to me. He told me about it while he was still alive. "He was really hurt by your harsh words and your constant spending. He wanted to make sure the life insurance money was used wisely, so he trusted me to handle it." I looked at both of them and said, "I've had a dream for a long time, though I never told anyone. I want to support children who are struggling financially, and now, with the money from Dad's estate and the life insurance, I can make that dream come true." I then explained, "I used the funds to build this large house, which some might even call a mansion. I still work as a nursery teacher, but I'm also using the real estate skills I learned from Dad to grow my assets." As I finished explaining, my mother and Jack were furious. Their voices rose in anger. "This is ridiculous," Jack shouted. "Why didn't you tell us something this important? If we had known about the real estate, we never would have given it up." I simply smiled. "You were both so eager to get rid of the debt that you didn't take the time to see the full picture. You looked down on me and never expected I could handle something like this. But Dad believed in me, and now, thanks to him, I've made sure his legacy is used in a way that helps others." My mother and Jack stood there, speechless and angry, but there was nothing they could do. The choices they had made out of selfishness had led to this moment, and now they had to live with the consequences. I stood firm and replied, "Dad knew you would react this way, and that's why he kept everything a secret to stop you from trying to take it all. I didn't expect you to behave exactly as he predicted, but he was right." My mother was furious. "What are you talking about? We deserve our share of the inheritance. We have a right to it." Her demand shocked me. It was bold and selfish, but I wasn't surprised. Money has a way of revealing people's true character, and my mother and Jack were showing exactly who they were: arrogant and greedy, just as I had always known. "You both gave up that right when you renounced the inheritance," I calmly explained. "It's not possible to change your minds now. I can't give away what Dad worked so hard for to people who are only interested in themselves." Jack, frustrated and angry, shouted, "The uneducated one just keeps whining. Stop talking and hand it over now." Even though they continued to argue and demand the money, I knew I couldn't let them push me around. They were acting out of greed, and I had no choice but to ask security to remove them from my property. They left quietly after being escorted out, but their behavior didn't stop there. In the days that followed, security footage showed my mother and Jack hanging around my house, trying to figure out a way to get their hands on my father's inheritance. Their persistence was unsettling, and I knew I had to take action. Using the footage, I reported them to the police, labeling them as suspicious individuals. After that, I never saw them near my home again. A while later, I heard about my mother and Jack's situation through a family friend who had known us for years. Jack had found a new job, but his self-centered attitude quickly made him unpopular. Within a year, he had alienated his boss and coworkers, and he was reassigned to a desk job, a far cry from the special treatment he had once received as the son of the company president. Eventually, the stress of the work environment became too much for him, and he left the job. With his reputation tarnished, it became difficult for him to find a new job in the same industry. My mother, who had always praised and favored Jack, now turned on him. "Why aren't you working? Stop being lazy," she would constantly scold him. But it didn't change the fact that Jack was struggling to rebuild his career after ruining his chances. Meanwhile, I continued to live my life in peace, knowing that my father had trusted me with his legacy for a reason. While my mother and Jack had shown their true colors, I was able to honor my father's memory and his wishes by using his hard-earned wealth wisely. Their greed and selfishness only pushed them further away, while I moved forward, stronger and more determined than ever. Jack would often respond with excuses like, "I'm just sitting around doing nothing," whenever my mother asked him why he wasn't working. She would lash out at him, saying, "What kind of effort are you putting in? You're useless and unemployed." After seeing Jack's failure to hold down a job, my mother's attitude toward him changed drastically. She once favored him, but now she blamed him for his lack of success and his joblessness. Her warmth turned cold, and she became distant, putting more and more pressure on him. The shift in my mother's behavior had a big impact on Jack. The constant criticism and coldness from her put a lot of mental strain on him, and he slowly became more withdrawn. Eventually, he stopped interacting with people and became a recluse, hiding from the world. Jack had always relied on our father's income and had never developed any real skills or the desire to work. Now, with my father gone, my mother and Jack both struggled financially. They were finding it hard to make ends meet without my father's support. As for me, my life took a much more positive turn. I am now happily married to the man I had been dating for a while, though I kept it a secret for so long. We live together in the large house that I own, which was part of the inheritance I received from my father. My husband shares my deep passion for helping children who are facing financial difficulties. Together, we are working toward making this dream a reality. We are setting up the necessary facilities and working to get all the required qualifications to support children in need. I feel incredibly grateful for the opportunities my father's hard work and planning have given me. His guidance and support were irreplaceable, and I carry his memory with me every day. With my husband by my side, I am living a life filled with purpose and fulfillment. We are not only building a strong and happy family, but we are also working to make a difference in the lives of others. While my mother and Jack continue to face their own struggles due to poor decisions and lack of responsibility, I am moving forward. I have turned the challenges life threw at me into motivation to build something meaningful. My father believed in me, and I am honoring his memory by using what he left behind in a way that brings good to others. Now, with a supportive partner and a clear sense of purpose, I am creating a future that not only benefits us, but also helps those who need it most. My father's legacy lives on through the work I do, and I feel fulfilled knowing that I am making a difference, one step at a time.
The envelope sat on our kitchen counter like a loaded gun. 3 years of building my jewelry business in Europe, and this was my welcome home gift, divorce papers wrapped in Derek's pristine handwriting. Sign these and we can discuss terms. Your success has changed you. Time to remember your priorities. I'm Olivia, and until 10 minutes ago, I thought I was living someone else's nightmare. The house still smelled like the lasagna I'd made and frozen before leaving for Milan 3 weeks ago. He'd probably heated it up last night, eating alone at our granite countertop while plotting this ambush. My hands shook as I pulled my phone from my pocket, thumb hovering over Derek's number. The urge to call him, to demand answers, to beg for explanations crashed through me like a wave. But something else rose up instead, something cold and sharp, like the metal I shape into delicate pieces every day. You've reached Derek Bennett. Leave a message. I got your note. Funny thing about priorities, they tend to shift when you realize you've been living someone else's version of your life. My voice came out steadier than I felt. I'll have my lawyer contact yours. I hung up and started moving, pulling suitcases from the garage. The same ones I'd unpacked barely an hour ago. As I moved through our house, our perfect, magazine-worthy house, memories ambushed me at every turn. Derek's smile when I sold my first collection. His gradual withdrawal as my name gained recognition. The subtle digs about my travel schedule, the passive-aggressive comments about normal wives. The jewelry box on my dresser caught my eye, my grandmother's sapphire ring inside. Derek had promised to have it sized for me 3 years ago. It was still too big, sliding around my finger whenever I wore it. One more promise he'd never kept. My phone buzzed. Clara's name lit up the screen. "Tell me you're not still at that house," she said before I could speak. "Packing now. Could use a friend. I'll bring wine and boxes." "And Olivia? Remember what you told me about that client who tried to lowball you last month? Know your worth?" "Exactly. And honey? You're worth way more than his terms and conditions." I slipped the sapphire ring into my pocket as I heard Derek's car pull into the driveway. Perfect timing. I'd rather he watch me leave than explain why I'm going. Sometimes the best revenge isn't what you say, but what you don't. The front door opened. I grabbed my bags and headed for the stairs, my heart pounding but my steps sure. He wanted to discuss terms? Fine. But they'd be mine, not his. And they'd cost him far more than he was ready to pay. Clara's spare bedroom feels like a confessional booth tonight. We're sprawled across her guest bed, surrounded by half-empty wine glasses and the wreckage of my marriage. While I pieced together the moment everything started falling apart. Remember when Derek came to my first jewelry show? I twist my wedding ring. Muscle memory still reaching for it even though it's sitting in my purse. He bought me that ridiculous bouquet of roses. Told everyone how proud he was. "You mean the show where you sold every single piece?" Clara's voice carries an edge I've never noticed before. Funny how his pride started shrinking right around then. The memory hits like a slap. Derek's smile tightening as buyers clustered around my display. His hand on my lower back, steering me away from conversations. The drive home filled with suggestions about scaling back and maintaining work-life balance. My phone buzzes. Another text from Derek: "We need to talk about the house payments. You can't just walk away from our life together." I show Clara the message. She snorts. "Our life together? You mean the life where you funded his fancy car payments while he complained about your expensive hobby? He wasn't always like this." But even as I say it, I'm remembering other moments. The way he'd introduce me at corporate parties: "This is my wife, she makes jewelry," dismissing 6 years of international success with 4 words. How he'd check our joint account daily after I started making more than him. Wasn't he? Clara reaches for her phone, scrolling through photos. "Look at this. Your anniversary dinner last year." The picture shows Derek and me at Le Cirque. I'm wearing the necklace I designed for their winter collection. Derek's looking at his phone, not me. I'd forgotten about that night, how he'd spent 30 minutes telling his colleague about his upcoming promotion. Never mentioning that my pieces were being featured in Vogue that month. Another text arrives: "Lucas says you're not answering his calls either. He's worried about you." We all are. Since when does Lucas care? I mutter, but something clicks. Lucas, who always seemed to show up when Derek and I fought. Who always had Derek's ear. Who knew exactly when to call with some crisis that needed his brother's attention. You know what's interesting? Clara sets down her wine. Your success started threatening Derek right around the time Lucas lost his job in jewelry wholesale. Funny coincidence. I stare at her, pieces falling into place like stones in a setting. You think Lucas? I think someone's been whispering in your husband's ear for years. And I think it's time we found out exactly what he's been saying. The room feels colder suddenly. I reach for my phone, but not to answer Derek's texts. Instead, I pull up Lucas's contact info, my finger hovering over the call button. Sometimes the path to revenge requires a detour through truth. Moving into Mom's house feels like admitting defeat, but the text from my accountant confirms what I already suspected. Derek's been systematically draining our joint accounts for months. The timestamps match perfectly with my European business trips. He can't do this, Mom says, watching me unpack my jewelry-making tools in her sunroom. You built that business from nothing. Actually, he can't. I hold up my phone, showing her the separate business account statements. What he doesn't know is that I moved all the business assets 3 months ago. When he started asking too many questions about my Milan contracts. The doorbell rings. Through the frosted glass, I recognize Lucas's silhouette. Mom shoots me a warning look, but I nod. Time to start pulling threads. Olivia, thank God. Lucas steps in, all concerned brother-in-law energy. Derek's a mess. He says you've frozen him out of everything. Interesting choice of words. I keep arranging my tools, not looking up. Kind of like how someone froze you out of the jewelry wholesale business last year. His pause lasts a fraction too long. That was different. Market changes, you know how it goes. Do I? Now I meet his eyes. Because I remember you telling Derek how unstable the jewelry market was. Right before he started questioning every business decision I made. Lucas's face shifts, surprise, then calculation. You're upset. Reading things into your bankruptcy filing? I pull out my phone again. Public records are fascinating. Especially the part where you lost everything to a competitor 3 weeks before you started having those private talks with Derek. Mom moves closer, her presence solid behind me. Lucas glances between us, his practiced concern cracking. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. You lost your business to my biggest European distributor. The same one who just signed an exclusive contract with me. I lean forward. Did you really think I wouldn't find out you tried to undercut my prices? That you used Derek to get information about my designs? His face drains of color. My phone buzzes, Derek calling again. I let it ring. Here's what's going to happen, I continue, my voice steady despite my racing heart. You're going to tell Derek exactly why you've been poisoning his mind against my success. Or I'll let my distributor know who's been leaking confidential pricing information to their competitors. You wouldn't. Try me. I've got nothing left to lose. I turn back to my workbench, picking up a delicate pair of pliers. But you and Derek? You've got everything. Lucas leaves without another word. Mom squeezes my shoulder. That was either very brave or very dangerous, she says. Maybe both. I start working on a new piece, the metal cold and unforgiving under my hands. But sometimes you have to break something completely before you can remake it into something better. The email from Evan arrives at 3 in the morning. My hands shake as I read it twice, 3 times, making sure I understand what he's offering. An exclusive line for Cartier, my designs featured in their flagship stores across Europe. The kind of opportunity that changes everything. The kind of opportunity Derek always said would never come. My phone lights up with his name again, the 20th call today. This time, I answer. The mortgage payment bounced, he says instead of hello. I thought we could discuss this like adults. I focus on the delicate wire piece I'm shaping, letting the familiar motions steady my voice. Funny how you want to discuss things now. Was that before or after you tried to access my business accounts? Those accounts belong to both of us. Everything we built. Everything I built. The wire snaps in my hands. While you were telling everyone at your firm that I had an expensive hobby. Silence crackles between us. Then, Lucas told me about your meeting. About your threats. Not threats. Promises. I set down my tools. How long have you known about what he did to my European contracts? Olivia, he's my brother. He needed. And what am I, Derek? The pause tells me everything. I hear papers shuffling on his end. The house payment. Is your problem now? Check your email. My lawyer sent over the separation agreement this morning. I'm keeping my business assets. You're keeping the house you insisted we needed. You can't afford to walk away from this marriage. Evan's email glows on my screen. The advance payment alone would cover 5 years of mortgage payments. Actually, I can't afford not to. A knock at the door makes me turn. Clara stands there, holding up a bottle of champagne. Behind her, Mom's already getting glasses from the cabinet. Think carefully about what you're doing, Derek says, his voice dropping into that familiar, patronizing tone. You're emotional right now. Making rash decisions. I look at the women in the kitchen, my real support system. At my workbench covered in half-finished pieces that will soon sit in Cartier displays. At the life I built while he was busy trying to contain it. No, Derek. For the first time, I'm thinking perfectly clearly. I pause, letting the weight of the moment settle. By the way, Lucas isn't the only one who keeps records. Check your email again in an hour. I think your boss might be interested in knowing whose designs you've been passing off as investment opportunities. I hang up before he can respond. Clara pops the champagne cork, and Mom hands me a glass. To clear thinking, Clara says, grinning. I raise my glass, feeling lighter than I have in years. To expensive hobbies. Lucas shows up at my studio unannounced, his face ashen. Through the window, I see Derek pacing in the parking lot, phone pressed to his ear. You have to stop this, Lucas says, dropping a manila envelope on my workbench. The board meeting's tomorrow. If you send those design records to his boss. Like you sent my pricing information to my competitors? I continue soldering the delicate gold chain I'm working on. Letting the torch's flame speak louder than my anger. That was different. I was desperate. He runs his hands through his hair. Derek's about to make partner. Everything he's worked for. Everything he stole. I set down the torch, meeting his eyes. Those designs he's been showing the investment team? The ones that got him fast-tracked for partner? They're mine. Every single one. Lucas freezes. He said you were collaborating. Is that what he told you when he copied my portfolio during my Milan trip? I opened my laptop, turning it to show him the timestamps. Or when he registered patents for my designs under his name. Through the window, I watched Derek end his call, his shoulders slumping. The sight should satisfy me, but something hollow opens up in my chest instead. He'll lose everything, Lucas whispers. Like I was supposed to. I pull out another envelope, sliding it across the bench. These are the real records, everything he took, everything he claimed. What you do with them is up to you. Why are you giving these to me? Because you're not the only one who was desperate. I pick up my torch again. The difference is, I built something new instead of trying to tear someone else down. Lucas stares at the envelope, then at his brother outside. If I show these to the board, then you'll be the hero who saved the firm from fraud. Funny how revenge works both ways, isn't it? He leaves without another word, clutching both envelopes. Through the window, I watch their confrontation, Lucas showing Derek the papers, Derek's face crumpling as he realizes what's happening. What his brother's about to do. My phone buzzes. Evan's message lights up the screen. Cartier loves the new collection. When can you start? I look at the brothers in the parking lot, at the life I'm dismantling with a few pieces of paper. Derek looks up, meets my eyes through the window. For a moment, I see the man who once believed in me, before fear turned his love into control. I text Evan back, I'll book my flight tomorrow. Sometimes revenge isn't about destroying someone else's dreams. Sometimes it's about finally having the courage to chase your own. The board meeting ends at exactly 2:47 p.m. I know because I'm sitting in my car outside Derek's office building, watching executives file out one by one. Lucas emerges first, shoulders rigid, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Then Derek, his tie loose, face gray. My phone vibrates, Clara calling again. I let it go to voicemail. She doesn't understand why I need to be here, to witness this. Neither does Mom, who spent breakfast trying to convince me to focus on packing for Paris instead. Derek spots my car. For a moment, he just stands there, then starts walking over. I roll down my window before he can knock. Satisfied? His voice cracks on the word. The board's launching a full investigation. They're suspending me pending the results. Like you suspended my business deals when Lucas fed you false information? The words taste like ash in my mouth. I did it for us. He leans down, gripping the car door. Everything I did, the designs, the patents, it was to secure our future. To prove I could. Could what? Control me? I grip the steering wheel tighter. Or just stop feeling so damn threatened by my success. They're going to find everything, Olivia. The fake patents. The stolen designs. Lucas made sure of that. His knuckles whiten on the door. My career's over. Are you happy now? The truth hits like a physical blow, I'm not. This hollow victory feels nothing like the revenge I imagined. I reach for my purse, pull out an envelope. What's this? A letter to the board. Explaining that we collaborated on those designs. That I gave you permission to use them. My voice sounds distant, even to myself. It won't save your job, but it might save you from fraud charges. He stares at the envelope, then at me. Why? Because destroying you won't fix what broke between us. I start the car. My flight leaves tomorrow. The divorce papers are with my lawyer. Sign them, Derek. Let's both move on. Olivia, wait, he steps back as I pull away, the envelope clutched in his hand. In my rearview mirror, I see Lucas approaching him, probably to twist the knife deeper. My phone buzzes again, Evan this time, with final details for the Cartier launch. I should feel triumphant. Instead, I feel empty, like I've won a war but lost something essential in the process. Maybe revenge isn't about destroying someone else. Maybe it's about finding the strength to walk away, to build something new from the ashes of what was lost. I turned toward Mom's house, toward the packed suitcases and the one-way ticket to Paris. Tomorrow, I'll start over. But today, I let myself mourn the death of a marriage that began with love and ended with two people trying to break each other. The airport terminal buzzes with early morning activity as I wheel my carry-on toward security. 6 hours until my flight to Paris. 6 hours until I can leave everything behind. Olivia. Derek's voice cuts through the crowd. He's running toward me, clutching something in his hand. Security eyes him warily. Whatever you're planning, don't. I step back, scanning for exits. It's over. I found this in your old design book. He holds up a sketch, my first jewelry design, dated 7 years ago. His handwriting in the margin reads, "This is extraordinary. You're extraordinary. Don't." My voice cracks. You lost the right to use those words against me. I'm not here to manipulate you. He looks different, defeated, but somehow lighter. Lucas told me everything. About how he orchestrated my promotion using your designs. About how he played us both. That doesn't change what you did with them. No, it doesn't. He runs his hand through his disheveled hair. But I need you to know, I didn't steal your designs for the promotion. I showed them because I was proud. Because for years, being Olivia Bennett's husband was the only thing that made me feel special. The truth hits harder than any lie could have. You destroyed us because you couldn't handle being in my shadow. I destroyed us because I forgot how to stand in your light. He holds out the sketch.
Growing up, I always knew I was second best. My name is Isabella, though everyone calls me Bella, and I'm the younger daughter in what appeared to be your typical middle-class family. My sister Catherine, Katie for short, was the golden child. 3 years older than me, she was blessed with naturally blonde hair that seemed to catch the sunlight just right in every photo. Mom never missed an opportunity to capture her perfect angel for the family album or social media. I wasn't ugly by any means. I had my own kind of pretty, dark hair, hazel eyes, and what my aunt called an interesting face. But in our house, interesting wasn't enough. Katie was the standard, and I was, well, just there. The favoritism wasn't subtle. When Katie needed new clothes, we'd spend entire weekends at the mall. When I needed something? We'll see next month, sweetie. Katie got the bigger bedroom because she needed space for her studying. She got a car for her 16th birthday. I got a watch for mine, not even a particularly nice one. The Real kicker came during our respective high school graduations. When Katie graduated, our parents threw this massive party. Dad proudly announced they'd be paying for her college education. She was going to study to become a bank manager, following in his footsteps. Everyone toasted to her bright future. 3 years later, I graduated with even better grades than Katie had. I still remember sitting at our kitchen table, college acceptance letters spread out in front of me, watching my parents exchange uncomfortable glances. "Honey," Mom started, not quite meeting my eyes, "we just don't have the money for college right now. The market's been tough, and with Katie's tuition." Dad jumped in, "Maybe you could work for a year or two, save up some money?" I sat there, stunned into silence. The same parents who had just bought Katie a new laptop for college were telling me they couldn't afford my education. That night, I cried myself to sleep, but it was the last time I would cry over their favoritism. The next morning, I started job hunting. Within a month, I landed a position as a maid at the Grand Plaza Hotel, the fanciest hotel in our city. While Katie moved back home after college graduation, to save money, she said, I moved into a tiny studio apartment across town. Living on my own was tough at first, but it beat staying at home watching Katie bask in our parents' endless attention. My apartment might have been basic, but it was mine. Every night when I came home exhausted from work, I felt a sense of pride knowing I was making it on my own. I threw myself into my work at the Grand Plaza Hotel. While some of the other maids complained about the demanding guests and endless rooms to clean, I saw every task as an opportunity to learn the hotel business from the ground up. "Bella, you're the only one who consistently gets perfect room inspection scores," Mrs. Rodriguez, the head housekeeper, told me after just 3 months. "How do you do it?" "I just try to think about what I'd want if I were staying here," I replied, straightening my uniform. Within 6 months, I was promoted to head maid. That's when I first met him, James Richardson, the guest in room 742. He was probably in his mid-40s, distinguished looking, with salt and pepper hair and expensive suits. I noticed him watching me one morning while I was supervising the cleaning of the 7th floor. "Miss," he called out, "could I have a word?" What started as a simple request about extra towels turned into a 15-minute conversation about hotel operations. The next day, he happened to run into me again. And the next. And the next. "Join me for dinner tonight," he suggested casually on his 5th day at the hotel. "I know a lovely restaurant downtown." I straightened my shoulders and looked him directly in the eye. "Mr. Richardson, I appreciate the invitation, but I need to be clear, if you're looking for a temporary arrangement during your stay, I'm not interested." Instead of being offended, he laughed. "Fair enough. But my invitation stands, just dinner, nothing more." I declined politely but firmly. He continued to be friendly, but respectful, for the remainder of his 3-week stay. The day he checked out, he left me a business card with his number. I tucked it away and thought that would be the end of it. 2 weeks later, everything started changing. First, I was called to the hotel manager's office and offered a position at the front desk, a significant promotion. Before I could get used to my new role, I was promoted to head of the registration team. A few weeks after that, I became assistant manager of the front office. Within 2 months of Mr. Richardson's departure, I found myself as the manager of the entire front office. The speed of my advancement made my head spin. While I knew I was good at my job, this seemed almost too good to be true. The whispers started soon after. "She must be sleeping with Mr. Blackwood," I overheard one of the receptionists telling another, referring to our hotel owner. "Did you see how fast she moved up? Nobody gets promoted that quickly without, you know." I tried to ignore the gossip, but it stung. I'd worked hard for every promotion, stayed late, learned every aspect of the operation. Yet people assumed I'd slept my way to the top. The truth was, I'd barely even met Mr. Blackwood, let alone had an affair with him. One Monday morning, Mr. Blackwood's secretary called to schedule a meeting. My stomach churned. These unexpected meetings usually meant trouble. I knocked on his office door precisely at 2 p.m. "Come in, Bella," he called out. "Please, have a seat." Mr. Blackwood was a tall man in his 60s, with kind eyes that always seemed to be evaluating something. He shuffled some papers on his desk before looking up at me. "You've done exceptional work here," he began. "But there's something we need to discuss. Your position as front office manager typically requires a college degree in hospitality management or a related field." My heart sank. Here it was, they'd finally realized I wasn't qualified for the job. "I think it's time for you to go to college, Bella." I blinked, confused. "I'm sorry?" "The hotel will work with your schedule, of course. We want you to get your degree while maintaining your position here." My mind was spinning. This wasn't at all what I'd expected. "I don't know what to say," I stammered. "Thank you, but why?" He smiled, reaching into his desk drawer. "You know, I don't often take advice about personnel decisions from outside sources, but in your case, a good friend insisted I pay attention." He pulled out a business card and slid it across the desk. "If you're curious about why your career has taken such an interesting trajectory lately, give this number a call." I picked up the card, and my breath caught. It was the same number Mr. Richardson had given me months ago. That evening, sitting in my apartment, I stared at the card for a full hour before finally picking up my phone. My hands were shaking as I dialed. "I was wondering when you'd call," that familiar voice answered on the second ring. You're friends with Mr. Blackwood?" I managed to ask. James chuckled. "We've known each other for 30 years. When I spot talent, he trusts my judgment. So all these promotions were entirely earned," he cut in firmly. "I simply suggested he pay attention to your potential. Everything you achieved, you did on your own merit." We talked for hours that night. He explained how he'd watched me work during his stay, impressed by my attention to detail and natural leadership abilities. He'd seen something in me that reminded him of himself when he was younger, that drive to prove yourself against all odds. 2 days later, we had dinner at that same restaurant he'd first invited me to months ago. This time, I said yes. I enrolled in college the following week, majoring in hotel and restaurant management. James supported me every step of the way, not just emotionally but practically, helping me study, sharing his business experience, teaching me things no textbook could cover. Our relationship deepened naturally. There was no grand romantic gesture, no dramatic moment when everything changed. We simply grew closer day by day, until being together felt as natural as breathing. "Move in with me," he said one evening, 6 months after that first phone call. We were sitting on his penthouse balcony, looking out over the city lights. A month later, we were married in a small but elegant ceremony, and I moved from my tiny studio into his luxurious penthouse apartment. "Girl, you hit the jackpot," my friend Sarah exclaimed over coffee one afternoon. "Successful, handsome, and actually nice? Those kinds of men aren't supposed to exist." I laughed, but she wasn't wrong. James was everything I could have hoped for in a husband. He supported my education, celebrated my career achievements, and made me feel valued, something I'd never experienced growing up. My newfound happiness made family gatherings interesting, to say the least. Katie, who had always been the star of the show, was struggling to keep a man interested for more than a few weeks. Her career at the bank was going well, she'd made it to assistant manager, but her personal life was a mess. I'd catch her staring at James and me during holiday dinners, her eyes filled with barely concealed envy. The same sister who used to ignore me unless she needed something now couldn't stop watching my every move. "Did you see how Katie was looking at your ring all through Christmas dinner?" James asked me afterward. "I thought she was going to drill a hole through it with her eyes." "She's always been used to having the best of everything," I sighed. "I don't think she knows how to handle not being the center of attention anymore." The situation got more awkward when my parents started their campaign to get Katie married off. Mom would corner me at every family gathering. "Sweetie," she'd say in that syrupy voice she used when she wanted something, "surely James must have some nice friends? Single ones? Katie's not getting any younger, you know." Dad was more direct. "Your sister deserves someone successful, like James. You should help her out, it's what family does." The irony wasn't lost on me. The same parents who couldn't find money for my education were now trying to use my connections to benefit their favorite daughter. "James must know lots of eligible businessmen," Katie herself finally said one day, cornering me in the kitchen during Easter dinner. "Why haven't you introduced me to any of them?" I looked at my sister, really looked at her. The perfect blonde hair was still there, but her eyes held a desperate edge I'd never seen before. "Maybe because I don't want to be responsible for someone else's love life," I replied carefully. "Besides, relationships aren't about just finding someone wealthy, Katie." "Easy for you to say," she snapped. "You already got the rich husband." I walked away from that conversation knowing I'd made the right choice to keep my distance. Something about Katie's attitude toward finding a wealthy man made me uncomfortable. It felt less like she wanted love and more like she was hunting for a prize. I thought I'd finally found my happily ever after. The next 2 years seemed to prove me right, at least on the surface. But slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, things began to change. It started with small things. James began coming home later and later from work. His business trips, which used to be occasional, became more frequent. At first, I made excuses for him in my head. He was busy, the company needed him, this was just a temporary phase. "Sorry, darling, emergency board meeting," he'd text, missing another dinner I'd prepared. "This trip might take 2 weeks instead of 1, he'd say, barely looking up from his phone. Our home felt emptier with each passing day. The sound of my heels echoing through our penthouse apartment became a lonely reminder of how much time I spent there alone. Finally, one evening, I decided enough was enough. I waited up for him, determined to have a real conversation about what was happening to us. "James, we need to talk," I said when he walked in at 11 p.m. He looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, cold, distant, almost annoyed. "Yes, we do." What happened next felt like a scene from someone else's life, not mine. "I want a divorce," he said flatly, as if he were discussing the weather. "I don't love you anymore." Actually, I'm not sure I ever did. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "What?" "James, if something's wrong, we can work on it." "There's nothing to work on, Bella. It's over. My lawyer will be in touch." Everything moved at warp speed after that. Within days, I was served divorce papers. The prenuptial agreement I'd signed, the one I'd thought was just a formality, meant I had no claim to anything. Not the apartment, not his money, not even the furniture we'd picked out together. In a daze, I packed my clothes and personal items into 3 suitcases. With nowhere else to go, I called my parents. "Mom, Dad, I need to stay with you for a little while," I said, trying to keep my voice from breaking. "Just until I figure things out." The silence on the other end should have told me everything. "Oh, honey," Mom's voice dripped with false sympathy, "we're in the middle of renovations right now. The guest room is completely torn apart." "I could sleep on the couch," I suggested. "Well, you see," Dad jumped in, "we're having the living room painted too. And you know how small this house is." They had excuse after excuse, each one more transparent than the last. What hurt most was the barely concealed satisfaction in their voices. They were actually happy about my fall from grace. I found a small apartment across town and tried to throw myself into my work. But suddenly, nothing was going right there either. Every report I submitted came back with corrections. Every decision I made was questioned. Finally, Mr. Blackwood called me into his office. The same man who had championed my career now couldn't quite meet my eyes. "Bella," he said, shuffling papers on his desk, "perhaps it would be best if you considered other opportunities. We'd be happy to provide a reference." Depression hit me hard after losing everything. For a month, I barely left my bed. The silence from my family was deafening, not a single call, not even a text to check if I was alive. Thank God for Sarah. "Get up," she demanded one morning, barging into my apartment with coffee and bagels. "This isn't the Bella I know." "The Bella you knew had a life," I mumbled into my pillow. "No," she yanked my curtains open, "the Bella I know is a fighter. The one who started as a maid and worked her way up to management. The one who put herself through college while working full-time. That Bella's still in there somewhere." Thank goodness I'd always been careful with money. Even with the prenup, I had my own savings from years of working and living below my means. James had taught me one useful thing, at least, always have a backup plan. One sleepless night, staring at my ceiling, it hit me. I knew the hotel business inside and out. I'd done every job from cleaning toilets to managing the front office. I knew what worked, what didn't, and most importantly, what guests really wanted. "I'm going to open my own hotel," I told Sarah over breakfast the next morning. She nearly choked on her coffee. "That's ambitious." "I've got savings for startup costs, but I'll need investors," I said, already making lists on my phone. "And I know exactly what kind of hotel I want to create." I threw myself into research, created a detailed business plan, and started networking. At a charity event for emerging entrepreneurs, I met 2 investors who loved my vision for a boutique hotel that would combine luxury with personal attention. The first year was brutal. I worked reception during the day, did paperwork at night, and filled in for every position when needed. Once, I spent 3 days doing housekeeping when my maid got the flu. But every exhausting moment felt different than before. This time, I was building something for myself. Slowly but surely, the hotel began to succeed. Word spread about our personalized service and attention to detail. By year 3, we were turning a profit. By year 5, I had paid back my investors in full, and the hotel was entirely mine. During all this time, my family remained silent. They'd cut me out of their lives so completely, it was as if I'd never existed. No more holiday invitations, no family gatherings, nothing. At first, it hurt, but gradually, I realized it was a blessing. Their absence meant no more comparisons, no more subtle put-downs, no more feeling like I wasn't enough. I did occasionally check Katie's social media. Old habits die hard, I guess. That's how I learned she'd finally found her rich man and had a baby. Her posts were full of designer baby clothes and exotic vacations. She seemed to have everything she'd always wanted. 2 years passed like a whirlwind. The hotel wasn't just successful, it had become the city's go-to destination for travelers seeking luxury with a personal touch. Travel bloggers regularly featured us in their content, praising our unique approach to hospitality. We should do something to give back to the community, I told my management team one morning. Something big. That's how the idea for our first charity gala was born. We transformed the hotel's grand ballroom into a glittering wonderland, invited local celebrities, business leaders, and press. The event aimed to raise money for educational scholarships for underprivileged students, fitting, given my own history with education. The gala was a massive success. Local TV stations covered it, online news sites ran features about the rags to riches story of the hotel's owner, and suddenly, I found myself in the spotlight. 3 days later, my front desk manager called my office. "Ms. Bennett, your parents are in the lobby. They're quite insistent about seeing you. They say they won't leave until you come down." I took a deep breath, straightened my suit jacket, and headed to the lobby. There they were, Mom and Dad, looking older but just as entitled as ever. "Bella," Mom rushed forward for a hug I deftly avoided. "Why are you here?" I asked coldly. "Can't parents want to reconnect with their daughter?" Dad tried to sound hurt. "We've seen how successful you've become. We're so proud." "Proud?" I laughed bitterly. "You weren't proud when I needed a place to stay after my divorce. You weren't proud during the 7 years you didn't bother to call." "Water under the bridge," Mom waved her hand dismissively. "Family should stick together in hard times. Speaking of which," her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, "Katie's going through such a difficult period. Her boyfriend left her, and now she's all alone with the baby. He won't pay any child support. Surely you could help your sister out." Perhaps it was morbid curiosity, or maybe just a desire for closure, but something made me ask, "How exactly do you expect me to help Katie?" Mom's eyes lit up, thinking she'd found an opening. "You could talk to her baby's father. Make him understand he needs to support his child." I couldn't help but laugh. "And why would this man listen to me? I don't even know him." "Don't be coy, Bella," Dad snapped. "Of course you know James. He was your husband, after all." The world stopped spinning for a moment. The pieces of the puzzle suddenly clicked into place with sickening clarity. My sister's mysterious rich boyfriend. My parents' sudden distance. The timing of my career's collapse. "James?" I whispered. "Katie and James?" "Well, it's not like it was planned," Mom said defensively. "These things just happen." "These things just happen?" My voice rose. "My husband and my sister? And you knew? You knew all this time?" "Katie and James fell in love," Dad said, as if that explained everything. "We couldn't very well take sides." "Couldn't take sides?" I was nearly screaming now. "You absolutely took sides. You cut me out of your lives. You refused to help me when I had nowhere to go. And now you have the audacity to come here and ask for my help. Don't be so dramatic, Mom huffed. Everything worked out for the best. Look at you, you have your own hotel now. So James did the right thing, having you fired from your old job. Katie thought it would be too awkward having you work there. I stared at my parents, these people who had raised me, who were supposed to love and protect me. In that moment, I saw them clearly for the first time, not as the parents who had favored Katie, but as willing accomplices in destroying my life. Get out, I said quietly. Now, Bella, Mom started. Get out, I screamed. Security. 2 of my security guards appeared instantly. These people are banned from the premises, I told them, my voice shaking with rage. They are never to be allowed in this hotel again, under any circumstances. Escort them out. You ungrateful little, Dad began, but the guards were already moving them toward the door. You'll regret this, Mom shouted. Family is all you have. No, I called after them. Family is supposed to love you, support you, protect you. You're not family. You're just people who happened to raise me. That was the last time I spoke to my parents. Through mutual friends and social media, I've heard snippets of what happened after. Katie and James's relationship imploded spectacularly. She posts daily rants about him on social media, calling him every name in the book, while he threatens her with lawsuits for defamation. My parents lost most of their retirement savings in a bad investment and had to downsize their house. Meanwhile, my life has taken a wonderful turn. 6 months ago, I met Michael at a hotel industry conference. He's kind, successful in his own right, and most importantly, he loves me for who I am, not what I can give him. We're getting married next spring. Sometimes, late at night, I scroll through Katie's angry social media posts about James, watching their dirty laundry being aired for all to see. I find myself laughing at the cosmic justice of it all. My sister, who thought she'd won it all by stealing my husband, now posts daily sob stories about being a single mom. James, who thought he'd upgraded to the better sister, is watching his reputation get dragged through the mud. And me? The sister they thought they'd destroyed? I'm thriving. My hotel is expanding to a second location next year. Michael and I are planning our future together. And most importantly, I'm finally free from the toxic family that never really loved me. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's living well and watching karma do its work from a safe distance, preferably with a glass of champagne in hand.